In the early hours of August 19, 1942, a daring mission was set in motion along the jagged northern coast of France. Known as Operation Jubilee, this Allied raid aimed at the heavily fortified port of Dieppe would later be remembered as one of the most controversial and devastating operations of the Second World War. Few at the time realized just how audacious the plan was. A combined force of British commandos, Canadian infantry, and supporting naval units would attempt a direct assault on a port that had been reinforced since the fall of France in 1940. Strategically, Dieppe was no ordinary target. It was a bustling harbor, guarded by concrete bunkers, machine gun nests, and artillery batteries designed to repel any amphibious incursion. Yet, despite reconnaissance and careful planning, whispers among the commanders suggested a gnawing uncertainty. Could a frontal assault on such a fortified position ever succeed? The roots of the operation lay in both strategy and necessity. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and General Sir Alan Brooke believed that a raid on the French coast could achieve several objectives simultaneously: test German coastal defenses, gather vital intelligence, and demonstrate to both occupied Europe and Allied nations that Britain was still capable of bold offensive action. For the soldiers, however, the plan was terrifying in its simplicity. Troops were expected to storm the beaches under heavy fire, push inland to capture key positions, and withdraw before German reinforcements could arrive. Reconnaissance photographs and reports indicated weaknesses in the coastal defenses, but in truth, these observations were often incomplete or misleading. Satellite imagery did not exist, and aerial reconnaissance could not capture the full scope of hidden obstacles: barbed wire, anti-tank obstacles, and artillery emplacements that awaited the landing craft like a trap. The human dimension of the raid was no less daunting. Approximately 6,000 men were assembled for the assault, the majority from the 2nd Canadian Infantry Division, including the Royal Regiment of Canada and the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry. Supporting them were British commandos from No. 3 and No. 4 Commando units, Royal Navy destroyers, and RAF Spitfire squadrons providing air cover. The soldiers were young, often barely out of training, and many had never faced combat. Diaries from the era capture a mix of excitement and trepidation. One Canadian officer noted, "We know the sea is waiting to take us to Dieppe, but we do not know what welcomes us there. I have confidence, yet a quiet fear gnaws at me." Such personal reflections reveal the human stakes behind the military planning, a tension that numbers and maps alone could never convey. Preparation for the raid was exhaustive. Troops trained relentlessly in amphibious landings along the south coast of England, simulating beach assaults and river crossings. Tanks and armored vehicles were specially modified to navigate shallow beaches and obstacles. Naval units rehearsed the coordination of landing craft, minesweepers, and fire support. Despite these preparations, there was a prevailing sense among some commanders that the operation relied too heavily on assumptions and optimism. Intercepted German communications suggested they were aware of increased Allied activity along the Channel coast, yet this intelligence was either underestimated or dismissed. In hindsight, these gaps in planning would prove fatal. On the morning of the assault, the Channel was thick with fog, offering the attacking forces both cover and peril. Visibility was limited, and the first wave of landing craft approached the beach under the constant threat of German observation posts. The soldiers could hear the distant roar of naval guns as destroyers laid down preparatory fire, yet the fog muted the chaos, making the scale of what awaited them almost impossible to grasp. Moments before the landing, officers issued last-minute briefings, emphasizing courage and coordination. Yet beneath these instructions was a silent acknowledgement that the raid carried risks that no amount of training could fully mitigate. As the first landing craft neared the shingle beach of Dieppe, a foreboding tension gripped both men and commanders alike. It was a calculated gamble, an operation designed to test not only German defenses but the resilience of Allied forces in the face of uncertainty. Questions lingered. Would reconnaissance be accurate? Could the beach be secured long enough to achieve any meaningful objective? And most hauntingly, who might not return from the crossing, their fate swallowed by the waters or captured by the enemy? The story of Operation Jubilee begins here, on a fog-laden Channel morning, with thousands of men unaware of the full peril that awaited them. The audacity of the plan, the youth and bravery of the troops, and the hidden dangers of Dieppe all converged to set the stage for one of the most scrutinized and mysterious raids of World War II. As the boats approached the fortified coastline, uncertainty hung over every decision, foreshadowing the chaos and unanswered questions that would define the raid in the days to come. The first step toward Dieppe had been taken, but what lay beyond the beach remained an ominous, unsolved puzzle that history would continue to examine. As dawn broke over the English Channel on August 19, 1942, the scale of Operation Jubilee became starkly apparent. Over 6,000 Allied troops prepared to storm the beaches of Dieppe, unaware that every wave of landing craft carried them closer to a deadly trap. The majority of the force, nearly 5,000 men, were Canadians from the 2nd Infantry Division, including units such as the Royal Regiment of Canada, the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, and the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders. They were supported by British commandos from No. 3 and No. 4 Commando, specialized in raids and sabotage, along with Royal Navy destroyers, gunboats, and minesweepers tasked with suppressing German defenses. The coordination of these diverse forces required precision, yet underlying intelligence gaps cast a shadow over the entire mission. The approach to Dieppe was fraught with tension. Early reconnaissance had suggested weak resistance along the beaches, but in reality, the Germans had spent 2 years fortifying the port. Coastal artillery, hidden machine gun nests, and concrete bunkers had been strategically placed to repel amphibious assaults. Troops in the landing craft could see the outlines of fortifications through the morning mist, but the true extent of obstacles remained concealed. Anti-tank barriers, wooden stakes reinforced with metal, lined the shingle beaches, and mines were buried beneath the sand, creating a deadly gauntlet. Even the tanks, promised to spearhead the attack, were vulnerable to these hidden defenses, leaving the infantry exposed to relentless fire. The human element of the landing compounded the danger. Soldiers were packed tightly into small landing craft, nerves taut with anticipation. Many had never experienced combat before. The Canadian soldiers, in particular, had been preparing for months with training exercises along England's south coast, but simulation could not replicate the terror of live fire. One officer recorded in his journal, "The sea rocks the boat, and we peer through the mist, uncertain what welcomes us. The men speak little, each lost in thought of family, fear, and duty. I wish I could see what lies beyond the fog, yet only the sound of artillery answers me." These words capture the silent dread that filled the boats as they neared the fortified coastline, a tension compounded by the fog that both concealed and threatened to betray them. Air support was meant to ease this assault. Spitfires and Hurricanes patrolled the skies, tasked with suppressing Luftwaffe reconnaissance and strafing coastal positions. Yet the fog and scattered German anti-aircraft fire limited the effectiveness of air operations. Meanwhile, the Royal Navy had planned a creeping bombardment of shore defenses, yet many guns were well concealed or positioned behind cliffs, allowing them to strike landing troops with lethal accuracy. Coordination between naval fire, air cover, and infantry landing was critical, but any misalignment could, and would, have catastrophic consequences. In the hours before the landing, these uncertainties created an atmosphere of quiet apprehension among officers and men alike. When the first wave of landing craft touched the beaches, the calculated tension erupted into chaos. Machine gun nests raked the shore, and German artillery struck with devastating precision. Tanks attempting to cross the shingle were immobilized by obstacles, leaving infantrymen stranded under fire. The scene was one of unimaginable carnage, as soldiers struggled to advance or retreat in the face of overwhelming resistance. The intensity of German firepower revealed a brutal truth. Intelligence had underestimated the strength and readiness of the defenders. Every moment on the beach became a test of survival, courage, and improvisation, as soldiers attempted to overcome barriers that had been invisible from aerial reconnaissance. Amid the firefight, elements of mystery began to emerge. Several Canadian units reported soldiers missing under circumstances that could not be immediately explained. Some had been hit, some captured, and others vanished into the chaos of the shingle and cliffs. Communication lines broke down between naval commanders and landing forces, leaving both sides uncertain about the overall progress of the raid. Eyewitness accounts later described confusion and fear, men firing in all directions, officers shouting orders that went unheard, and tanks abandoned in pools of sand and blood. The once promising tactical plan was unraveling under the relentless realities of war. By mid-morning, it was clear that Operation Jubilee was facing serious challenges. While small groups of commandos managed to penetrate inland objectives and destroy enemy installations, the bulk of the force was pinned on the beaches. The bravery of individual soldiers contrasted starkly with the overall failure of coordination, highlighting a fundamental lesson. Courage alone could not compensate for flawed planning and incomplete intelligence. Yet even in these grim moments of heroism emerged. Soldiers covering comrades, medics braving fire to aid the wounded, and small teams accomplishing objectives against overwhelming odds. These acts would later be memorialized, but they could not erase the unfolding disaster. As the day wore on, questions multiplied. Why had reconnaissance failed to reveal the true extent of German defenses? How many men were missing, captured, or killed? And most hauntingly, could the surviving forces extract themselves before the operation turned into a complete catastrophe? The answer would unfold slowly, with grim consequences, leaving commanders and historians alike to puzzle over the combination of intelligence failure, strategic miscalculation, and the indomitable courage of the men who had faced the impossible. The first steps toward Dieppe defenses had already been met with deadly resistance, and the unfolding story was only beginning to reveal the full scale of sacrifice, misjudgment, and unanswered questions that would define this fateful raid. The assault on Dieppe's beaches had begun, and the first waves of soldiers were immediately engulfed in a torrent of gunfire and shrapnel. What had been planned as a rapid and decisive raid now transformed into a desperate struggle for survival. The Canadian 2nd Infantry Division bore the brunt of the initial landings, their units, including the Royal Regiment of Canada, the Essex Scottish Regiment, and the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders, pinned down almost instantly by German fire from well-concealed bunkers and cliffs. The assaulting tanks, intended to provide cover for infantry, were immobilized by wooden stakes, concrete blocks, and deep shingle, leaving soldiers exposed to relentless machine gun and mortar fire. The dream of a swift, successful strike was slipping away with each second, replaced by chaos and confusion. The tactical challenge was immediate and deadly. German defenders, elements of the 302nd Infantry Division and coastal artillery units, had meticulously prepared their positions. Observation posts allowed precise targeting of landing craft, and concealed machine gun nests provided overlapping fields of fire. Even as Royal Navy ships attempted to suppress the coastal defenses with bombardments, many guns remained undamaged, hidden behind cliffs or concrete bunkers. Infantry commanders found themselves in impossible positions, unable to advance, unable to retreat, and unable to communicate effectively. The beach, a narrow expanse of shingle under direct fire, became a killing ground, and the soldiers' carefully drilled landing plans dissolved under the weight of reality. Amid this chaos, the human dimension of the struggle became painfully evident. Diaries and personal accounts reveal the sheer terror of the moment. Private John MacLeod of the Royal Regiment of Canada wrote, "The roar of guns drowns our voices. Men fall beside me. I cannot help them all. I wish for orders, for guidance, for something to make sense of this madness." Medics dashed into open fire to treat the wounded, often paying the ultimate price. Small teams of commandos attempted to neutralize enemy strongpoints, while others tried to reach inland objectives, only to find themselves cut off or surrounded. The fog of war, both literal and figurative, obscured the battlefield, leaving soldiers and commanders alike grasping for control in a rapidly deteriorating situation. The revelation of unanticipated obstacles compounded the disaster. Anti-tank devices destroyed nearly all the armored support within minutes of landing, while mines and hidden barbed wire trapped infantry in deadly zones. Some landing craft had been swamped or stranded on shingle ridges, leaving men stranded under enemy fire. Communication breakdowns further intensified the confusion. Signals between beach parties, naval support, and command units were often lost, misinterpreted, or delayed. For the soldiers, survival depended on quick thinking, improvisation, and sheer determination. Yet many units were fragmented, their cohesion destroyed by relentless fire and the unpredictable landscape. Despite the mounting losses, pockets of bravery shone through. Number 3 and Number 4 commandos managed to advance toward specific objectives, demolishing German gun emplacements and cutting communications lines. Canadian engineers attempted to clear obstacles for the tanks, while infantrymen dragged wounded comrades back to relative safety. These acts of valor, however, could not alter the broader tactical reality. The German defenses proved far stronger than anticipated, and even the most determined efforts of small groups could not stem the tide of casualties. Observers later noted that the courage displayed on Dieppe beaches was unmatched, but it was courage pitted against an enemy fully prepared for their arrival. As the hours dragged on, the scale of human loss became undeniable. Casualty reports indicated hundreds killed or wounded, with scores captured by German forces. Among the missing were entire units whose fate would remain uncertain for days. The psychological toll on the survivors was immense. Many men were dazed, exhausted, and traumatized by the relentless barrage and the sheer improbability of survival. Officers attempted to regroup units and mount counterattacks, yet with each failed effort, the stark reality emerged. Operation Jubilee was not proceeding according to plan. The question that haunted every surviving soldier was the same that would haunt historians for decades. How could meticulous planning unravel so quickly under fire? Even as small successes emerged, such as the demolition of key German positions by commandos, the overarching picture was grim. Dieppe's fortifications, combined with natural obstacles and communication failures, had created a nearly impenetrable defensive zone. Soldiers were trapped on the beaches, tanks disabled, and naval bombardments only partially effective. Each moment carried the potential for further loss, and each act of bravery stood in stark contrast to the strategic misjudgments that had led the force into this trap. The unfolding battle was a brutal lesson in the limits of preparation, intelligence, and optimism in wartime. By late morning, the scene on the beaches was one of devastation. Shattered landing craft, overturned tanks, and scattered bodies testified to the ferocity of German fire. Survivors pressed inland where possible, attempting to achieve minor objectives, but most units were pinned or forced back to the shore. The mystery of the missing soldiers, the unexplained collapse of some units, and the failure to reach key positions began to emerge as central questions for both commanders and historians. The early hours of Operation Jubilee had transformed from a test of Allied ingenuity to a harrowing ordeal that would leave an indelible mark on all who witnessed it, setting the stage for further tragedy and profound lessons about courage, misjudgment, and the unpredictability of war. By mid-morning on August 19, 1942, the full scale of the disaster at Dieppe began to crystallize. While the first waves of landing craft had been decimated by German machine gun nests and artillery, a more insidious problem emerged: the fate of the missing and captured. Among the Canadian 2nd Infantry Division and supporting British commandos, entire platoons had vanished into the chaos of the shingle beach and cliffs, leaving no immediate account of what had become of them. Survivors spoke of men disappearing under the fusillade, swept aside by the tide of German fire, or being dragged into bunkers by unknown captors. The confusion created a harrowing uncertainty, both for those still fighting and for command back in England. The struggle to maintain communication further compounded the crisis. Radio signals faltered under interference, while messengers braved open fire to deliver fragmented orders. The Royal Navy, positioned offshore to provide covering fire and coordinate extraction, found its support hampered by poor visibility, heavy smoke, and chaotic troop movements. The coordination between land, sea, and air forces, a hallmark of amphibious operations, had broken down entirely. Reports of isolated groups holding out in bunkers or trapped on the beaches circulated, but there was no comprehensive picture of troop locations. For commanders, the inability to ascertain the status of their forces was terrifying. Every delay in information meant more lives lost. Amid this disarray, the human stories of fear, bravery, and desperation emerged. Private Thomas Curry, captured after being separated from his unit, later recalled, "The noise was deafening, and the shingle burned underfoot. Men fell beside me, and I ran without knowing where I went. One moment we were advancing, the next we were surrounded." Medical units, overwhelmed by the wounded, improvised triage stations under fire, treating gunshot wounds, burns, and shrapnel injuries as best they could. Soldiers found themselves confronting the unthinkable, a battlefield without clear lines, where friend and foe were indistinguishable in the fog of terror. The personal diaries of officers echoed these experiences, noting the confusion, exhaustion, and disbelief at the sheer intensity of German defenses. Adding to the mystery was the sudden appearance of German reinforcements. As the operation unfolded, units from the 302nd Infantry Division, bolstered by elements of the Luftwaffe, moved swiftly to counter the Allied incursion. Soldiers who had survived the initial landing were now facing not only entrenched positions but also fresh troops maneuvering with precision to cut off escape routes. Some landing craft attempting to retreat were targeted by coastal artillery, further complicating evacuation. These unexpected countermeasures highlighted flaws in Allied intelligence. Reports of German troop strength, positions, and readiness had been incomplete or underestimated, creating a lethal gap between expectation and reality. Amid the unfolding catastrophe, small acts of heroism and ingenuity stood out. Commandos managed to sabotage radar installations and demolish a few artillery positions, while engineers attempted to clear lanes for retreating forces. Some Canadian units fought their way through heavy fire to cover comrades' withdrawals, exemplifying courage in the face of near-impossible odds. Yet these individual successes could not alter the larger narrative. The operation was faltering, and many soldiers remained unaccounted for, their ultimate fates shrouded in uncertainty. Questions began to surface among commanders and historians alike. How many were captured? How many perished without record? What decisions, if any, could have prevented such chaos? By the afternoon, the gravity of the situation forced the Allied command to call off Operation Jubilee. Orders for withdrawal were issued, and survivors began a harrowing retreat under continued enemy fire. Some were rescued by naval craft, others reached landing points on their own, while many remained missing or taken prisoner. The aftermath revealed staggering losses: nearly 900 killed, more than 1,900 wounded, and over 2,000 captured. The raid had exposed fundamental flaws in planning, intelligence, and equipment, yet it also provided crucial insights into amphibious warfare that would inform future Allied operations, including the Normandy landings. Even as the beaches were abandoned, the questions lingered. Which decisions had sealed the fate of the raid? How many men remained unaccounted for, and under what circumstances had they disappeared? What lessons could be extracted from such a costly operation without diminishing the valor and sacrifice of those involved? The mystery of the missing soldiers, the breakdown in communication, and the unexpected ferocity of German defenses would dominate post-raid analyses, leaving historians and military planners grappling with a complex puzzle. The chaos of Dieppe, while ending in retreat, had set the stage for deeper investigations into courage, strategy, and the unpredictable nature of war, revealing truths that were only partially understood at the time and leaving haunting questions that would echo through the annals of military history. By late afternoon on August 19, 1942, Operation Jubilee had reached its grim conclusion. The initial optimism that had accompanied the planning stages of the raid had long since dissipated, replaced by the stark reality of casualties, missing soldiers, and shattered objectives. Thousands of Canadian infantrymen, alongside British commandos, had been forced to withdraw under relentless German fire, their retreat covering a landscape littered with destroyed tanks, abandoned landing craft, and the bodies of comrades. The raid, intended as a brief and strategic strike, had become a harrowing test of endurance, courage, and the limits of human resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. The aftermath on the beaches was catastrophic. Estimates suggest nearly 900 soldiers had been killed, over 1,900 wounded, and more than 2,000 captured by German forces. Tanks intended to provide mobile fire support had been rendered useless by anti-tank obstacles and concentrated artillery, leaving infantry vulnerable and exposing the gaps in operational planning. The Royal Navy had rescued a fraction of the stranded forces, but many had to find their own way back under fire, navigating treacherous beaches and shingle cliffs. Survivors described scenes of unimaginable horror: men wading through seawater under machine gun fire, medics dragging the wounded to relative safety, and officers struggling to maintain order amidst the chaos. The human cost extended beyond the numbers. Entire platoons had vanished into the turmoil, their fate unknown for days, while families back in Canada and Britain awaited news with agonizing uncertainty. Letters and diaries from the survivors convey a mixture of grief, shock, and incredulity. One Canadian officer wrote, "We came with hope and purpose, yet found only fire and confusion. Men I trained with vanished in moments. Their absence is a wound that cannot heal." These words reflect the emotional toll on soldiers and commanders, whose decisions and observations would later be scrutinized in military inquiries and historical analyses. The strategic implications were equally severe. Operation Jubilee revealed glaring deficiencies in intelligence, planning, and coordination. Reconnaissance had underestimated German fortifications, coastal defenses, and the readiness of artillery units. Communication failures between naval, air, and land forces magnified the chaos on the beaches, while equipment shortcomings, including tanks unsuited for shingle and inadequate landing craft, hindered both the assault and withdrawal. In the wake of the raid, British and Canadian military leadership faced harsh questions regarding the decision-making that led to such catastrophic losses, highlighting the complex interplay between courage, planning, and misjudgment in wartime operations. Yet amid the disaster, acts of extraordinary valor and ingenuity shone through. Commandos from No. 3 and No. 4 units successfully destroyed radar installations and coastal gun emplacements, while small groups of Canadians provided cover for retreating comrades, risking their lives to save others. These heroic efforts, often carried out under near-impossible conditions, underscored the resilience and discipline of Allied soldiers even when faced with overwhelming odds. The stories of these individuals would later be commemorated, serving as a testament to human courage amidst the horrors of war. As the last waves of troops were evacuated, the raid left behind a landscape scarred by destruction and unanswered questions. The fate of missing soldiers, the breakdowns in coordination, and the apparent misjudgment of German defenses created a puzzle that historians would attempt to solve for decades. Operation Jubilee became a case study in the complexities of amphibious warfare, highlighting lessons in planning, intelligence gathering, and the inherent unpredictability of combat. These lessons, though born from tragedy, would directly inform the strategies and preparations for later operations, including the successful D-Day landings in Normandy. The emotional resonance of Dieppe lingered long after the beaches were abandoned. Survivors carried not only physical wounds but the weight of grief, loss, and unanswered questions regarding comrades who had vanished under fire. The raid had exposed the high cost of hubris, the limits of preparation, and the unpredictable cruelty of warfare. Yet it also revealed the extraordinary bravery, tenacity, and humanity of the men who had faced impossible odds. As the retreating soldiers left Dieppe behind, the mystery of those who were missing, the tactical miscalculations, and the acts of heroism that had punctuated the chaos would continue to echo, shaping military doctrine and public memory for years to come, leaving a haunting legacy of courage, loss, and enduring questions about what might have been avoided or anticipated. In the aftermath of Operation Jubilee, the full scope of the raid's consequences slowly came into focus. The staggering losses, nearly 900 dead, over 1,900 wounded, and more than 2,000 captured, cast a long shadow over the Canadian and British forces involved. The immediate operational objectives had largely failed. Dieppe remained firmly under German control, the port largely intact, and intelligence gains were limited. Yet even amid defeat, the raid offered lessons that would shape the future of Allied amphibious operations and illuminate the complexity of war's human and strategic dimensions. As historians and military analysts later discovered, the raid exposed severe flaws in planning and intelligence. Reconnaissance had underestimated German fortifications and troop strength, while aerial photography had missed key obstacles, including hidden artillery and anti-tank defenses. Communications between infantry, naval units, and air support broke down under fire, creating confusion that amplified the already disastrous casualties. The high cost of misjudgment became a point of intense debate. How could an operation so meticulously planned unravel so completely? The mystery of the missing soldiers, some taken prisoner, others killed in the chaos, remained unresolved for weeks, haunting both military leadership and families back home. Yet amidst these grim realities, individual acts of courage and resilience stood out. Canadian infantrymen faced relentless machine gun fire, navigating obstacles with determination and improvisation. British commandos penetrated enemy positions, sabotaging radar stations and artillery batteries despite overwhelming odds. Medics and engineers risked their lives to tend to the wounded and clear paths for retreat, exemplifying the enduring human spirit under extreme adversity. These stories of heroism, though overshadowed by the operation's failure, became emblematic of the sacrifices and valor displayed by Allied forces throughout the war. The legacy of Operation Jubilee extended far beyond the immediate battlefield. Lessons learned regarding amphibious assault planning, reconnaissance, coordination, and equipment directly informed future operations, including the meticulously executed D-Day landings in Normandy 2 years later. Military theorists studied DWII extensively, analyzing the tactical errors, the environmental challenges of beach assaults, and the psychological strain on soldiers under intense fire. The raid, though a tactical failure, contributed to the development of operational doctrines that would ultimately save thousands of lives in subsequent campaigns. Public perception of the raid was complex. Families mourned the dead and agonized over missing loved ones, while the media and political leaders debated whether the cost had been justified. Canadian units, in particular, felt the weight of heavy casualties, and the raid became a defining moment in national military history. Personal letters and memoirs from survivors speak of shock, grief, and a lingering sense of bewilderment. One officer reflected, "We faced the impossible and endured more than we could comprehend. Yet even in retreat, the courage displayed by our men remains beyond question." These reflections highlight the duality of Operation Jubilee, a story of strategic miscalculation intertwined with extraordinary human bravery. The haunting mysteries of DWII persisted long after the raid ended. Soldiers whose fates remained unclear, unrecorded actions of small units, and unanswered tactical questions continued to intrigue historians. Why had some units become isolated? How did certain soldiers manage to survive against overwhelming odds? And crucially, what combination of intelligence failures and tactical assumptions had set the stage for such devastation? The lingering questions ensured that DWII would not simply be remembered as a failed raid, but as a case study in courage, error, and the unpredictable realities of war. Ultimately, Operation Jubilee stands as both a warning and a testament. It demonstrates the peril inherent in underestimating the enemy and the battlefield, while simultaneously honoring the extraordinary valor of those who faced near-impossible circumstances. Though the raid did not achieve its strategic goals, the courage, sacrifice, and resilience of the Allied forces left an indelible mark on military history and public memory. The lessons learned about planning, coordination, and human endurance echoed in subsequent campaigns, shaping the very tactics that would eventually lead to Allied victory in Europe. The story of DWII, with its unanswered questions and haunting legacy, remains a vivid reminder of the thin line between ambition and catastrophe, and of the enduring human spirit amidst the horrors of war.